Okay, so welcome to the Be the Artist blog. Today I'm here with the wonderful Claire Bigley. Claire, please introduce yourself to our audience.
Mm, It is such a pleasure to be here. I am Claire Bigley. I'm a pianist, and I've just recently, in the past 3 years or so, started recording some of my own music. So yeah, I've been a pianist since early on. So piano, I know. This recording is has been kind of a new journey for me.
Yes.
So I live in New Orleans. And yeah, that's all that's coming to me at the moment.
Amazing. So I know you've been sort of classically trained. You sort of studied in Miami. You've had quite an international experience because you were a music director in Chicago, which we can get into a little bit. But how was the sort of classical training that you experienced, and how does that feel kind of with your own personal projects, having a training like that?
Well, it's interesting to me. I started in second grade, so my parents got. I was always enamored with the piano. My cousin had a piano, and every time we'd go over to her house, I had to have her try and teach me things. So
Right.
anyway, I started early. There was obviously a draw there for me, so my parents got me piano lessons, and I started with piano teachers, and the way they started with me was in the note reading, the classical way of doing it. So I didn't know any better. I just went with what was offered to me,
Right.
and I discovered that reading music's really easy for me. I
Mm,
feel like they're, two different kind of musicians, right? People who read notes really easily and people who play by ear really
right.
easily. And man, you're lucky if you can do both, right?
Right.
So I found out that it was easy for me to read the notes. So I kind of followed in that path. Knew early on I wanted to do this for a living. So I went through university, got my
Mm,
bachelor's, got my graduate degree,
yeah.
and then just kind of followed it step by step. How can I make music? How can I make money with music?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting one. I've always also felt connected to the piano. I'm not an instrumentalist in any way, but even as a vocalist, there's just something quite magical about a piano. I guess it's you're hearing the notes for what they really are, and as a vocalist, you connect with that, and it feels there's some synergy there when you're singing, you know. So I definitely understand that kind of connection to a particular instrument. I think is something a bit magical about that. When you've kind of explored writing your own music, and as I briefly mentioned, you were a music director in Chicago. When you started creating your own personal pieces, how was that experience, and what sort of have you taken that away from actually directing music for others to your own being an artist?
Well, it was interesting. And again, it was kind of like life nudged me in the
Mm.
right direction, right? I started for a while. I conducted a small men's ensemble,
Ah,
and they were a cappella or and accompanied by me. And I also had a conductor who was working with me. But I found that I hated the arrangements of pop music for choruses. And
yes.
so I'm like, God, I got to make it feel less straight and less annoying. So I arranged some things and I did some mashups of tunes. And so that was kind of my way into composing a little bit because, if you're arranging something, you're putting your own slice on it, but it's not quite jumping in the deep end,
Mm,
right?
right.
So I kind of got my toes wet with that. And so that opened me up to the possibility that writing my own stuff isn't that far beyond it. And then the
Mm,
other thing that kind of pushed me in that direction, I was working as an accompanist and a musical director at a small theater in Chicago. And I worked with a very gifted teacher slash director, Janet Lauer, and we were doing this class together and she was using movement for the
mm,
actors. We were working with kids, it varied from like 10 until high school ages.
right.
And she used a movement called Laban, which was, different percussive movements, lyrical, different ways of doing it. And I thought, gosh, you can do that with music too. And so
Mm,
I asked her if I could do something with the warm up and music to kind of do the same thing. And so I just sat down and started at the piano, kind of improving maybe a percussive lick or something, and they would move to it. And I
right.
found that we would inform each other,
Mm,
and so that then was the kind of wake up call of, oh, I don't have to wait for other people to do this. I can
mm,
sit down and allow myself to be in a state and just improv. So
right.
that's kind of how that happened.
No, that sounds amazing. And one of the things that I also saw sort of from your bio and from your website was you kind of describe yourself as a sound a healer, a sound healer in a way which is quite interesting. You know, you mentioned that music is kind of healing the mind, soul, and spirit. When did that kind of turn? I know obviously you could see music being transformative in dance and in movement. When did it become sort of a healing process for you, or was it always, the case?
It's interesting. I don't think we depart that much from when we come into this world, right? I feel like we're
Hmm.
always doing things, but our awareness of what we've been doing changes as we grow
Yeah,
older, as our perspective changes. So I think
yeah,
I've always been using music as a healing
yes.
device. And it's certainly, I mean, you talk to any musician, we know we're mostly here because we were immersed in music. It helped us
Hmm.
get through
Yes,
terrible, terrible things, right? We know
exactly,
this.
exactly.
But I wasn't aware of that until I started taking a holistic healing course with a man in Chicago. Kurt Hill is his name, and he's a wonderful, wonderful teacher. And I took a class with like six others, and we immersed ourselves in a 3-year program of holistic healing,
Mm,
um, which, we did some hands-on healing, we did tuning forks, we did Jungian psychology, we did a bunch of different talk therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, a bunch
mm,
of stuff. It was a deep dive. And so then that awakened me to, oh, I've been using music as a healing device my whole life, and I never really knew
right,
that.
right.
So yeah.
I think it's so interesting because I always say that whenever we are always learning, but we are always kind of unlocking things that we probably already know. You know, sometimes we kind of question, or why are we here, or what are we doing? But those are the answers that we actually kind of know already. You just need to be in a position where you kind of understand it and almost take away what we've learned to, or you need to unlearn some of the bad habits that you've kind of formed along the way. It's interesting. I think as musicians, I've always connected to musicians and creatives simply for that same reason. I know that the process is for most of us about healing, about expression, about changing some emotions and putting it into something else, which can be quite freeing as well. So it's an interesting kind of approach to music. You've gone into it with a connection with piano, and then learned what that connection is along the way, which is fantastic. So you kind of you've worked on music sort of throughout your life, but released your albums quite recently. I would say, I mean, your first one was in 2019 with Labyrinth. What made you decide to do music then as an album project, knowing that you kind of had a really wonderful music career so far? What was the reason to approach it at that point in your life?
Well, when I created Labyrinth, Labyrinth actually came out of kind of a project I was doing with this class I spoke of
Mm,
earlier. I was immersed in this 3-year program, and I thought, it'd be interesting to experiment a bit with what I was doing with the movement class, come up with some tracks, and see how they affected my classmates. If there
mm,
was a through line, if everyone kind of came through that track in the same way. And it was fascinating for me to kind of dive into that and to collect the information. And once I came out on the other side of that, I found I had, I think it's, I don't remember completely, I think it's 9 track album.
Hmm.
And it seemed like it had a flow to it. And
Right.
I thought, well, what if I offer this as a journey, a
Mm.
meditational music kind of journey? And so it was kind of a, when I had the idea, it felt really exciting to me in my body. And I thought, well, yeah, let's do it. So I
Yes.
just, you know,
It's interesting that you say that, because when I was listening to Labyrinth, that's exactly like the whole concept of that album I felt was that, unless like it's literally a labyrinth. It's like being in a maze, and kind of going through the ebbs and flows of certain things. So I definitely, with that album, I definitely could see where you were. I mean, through my own sort of perception, where you were in life and going into that space. So I think it's a very, very beautifully done album. And I think also, when I was looking through your projects, they've kind of been quite specific to your situation or the time that you're in. A year later, you released Time of COVID, which for a lot of people was quite a difficult time. What made you write that album for COVID at that time?
well, for me, yeah, it was very much an introspective.
Mm,
And my experience was a really positive one.
okay,
You know, so for me, it was love letters in the time of COVID, you
right.
know, kind of a testament to it. And it was one of those things where I just had to do it. I had
Mm,
to share my experience and put it out there. And it, you know, it starts with the first track, Saturation Point, which is very different from any of my other
right.
tracks. And for
Yes.
me, it was like that hamster wheel that we were all on and so used to in terms
Mm,
of our life. You know, our work schedules were in a momentum. Everything was spinning and spinning and spinning. And then for me, COVID hit, and within a week, everything had stopped.
right.
You know, that
Right.
so that collective silence, you know, which in
Mm,
that track I give you
yes.
about
That.
10 seconds of silence.
Yes. Yes.
And
It.
then
Sorry. Go ahead.
and then you slowly, at least for me, I slowly, it took me a while to kind of allow my body to relax into it because that impotence to do was still in my body.
Mm,
But with little time, with a little silence, then I could kind of, well, what do I want to do? What means something to me? How do I want to form my life?
right.
And then, you know,
Yeah.
you kind of take the journey there at that point.
Yeah, I think you know what, it's a great point. For me also during COVID, um, it was an odd space to be in. It wasn't necessarily a super negative time or a super positive time. It was that point that you just made. There was just a silence, or a stopping of what was normal at that point, and it made us all think, I think, introspectively. It For me, it was actually the time where I started thinking about creativity in a way that I hadn't thought of before. Sorry, you were gonna say something.
Or what we had gotten into the habit of thinking was
E-
normal.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly that. That's true. That is very true. My background actually is in chemistry. I did decades of chemistry. But I've always had a connection with music and creativity in that sense. But I've never been able to express myself in the way that I have done over the past year. So I think, although COVID was for me quite a horrible situation, because I like to be free, I don't like to be constrained in that sense. But it gave me time to think, like you mentioned, what's important to me? What do I want to do? And what do I want to explore? And obviously for me it was music, but for someone else it could be something different. So I was listening to that, and like you said, the first track, it's beautifully done, because that break kind of just makes you think, just take a breath, take a breath, and we're back in it again. So it's wonderfully done. What then made you kind of moving on to the last album, which was released last year, Emergence? What was that about for you, and where were you kind of in your headspace writing that music?
Well, it's interesting. I kind of found myself recording without actually having planned to. So I was bare bones, right? I was recording with my laptop in my living room, and
Hmm.
I'd listen back and I'd cringe at some of the background noise and that kind of stuff. But I didn't have the money to really go to a recording studio. And so I thought, how am I going to educate myself as best as I can to kind of
Mm,
improve some of this stuff, you know? And so I stumbled upon an online recording course and I took some online stuff. I hooked up with a series in a community where I could learn some things, learn some marketing, learn some recording techniques. And
mm,
so in 2021, I started applying some of the things I had learned to tracks. So it was kind of an experimental thing. And I started releasing singles.
right,
Um, so I could learn from each one and market one thing at a time the best I could. Because again, I'm doing all of it, right? I'm doing
right.
the YouTube stuff. You understand.
Yes. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, a lot of energy, and a lot of learning, like you mentioned. So, it's quite nice that you've proactively gone and sort of learned all of those things. For me, I've always regretted that I haven't been trained sort of musically with the piano, or I don't produce my own stuff. I work with a producer, but like you said, it's quite expensive, quite time consuming. But we wear many hats, like you
Mhm.
said, marketing, recording, writing, and then just life on top of that as well. So it's a lot to get through. Um, where would you say you are now in your own sort of recording process? Have you got your own studio set up? How is that for you?
Well, I got away from recording in my living room. I've moved up to my spare bedroom or my office because at least I can plug into a keyboard rather than
Right,
an actual acoustic piano and take out some of that ambient noise, you know.
right.
That has its own challenges because how do I make the keyboard sound more like a piano? So it's an ongoing process, you know. And it's interesting. I'm of the ilk that once I reach a certain point, because you can try and perfect these tracks for forever, right? It can never be
Mm.
released. And I kind of put myself at a time limit and go, okay, this is done, regardless of whether I feel like I could tweak it more or
Oh,
whatever.
I love
Because
that. I love
yeah,
that. Yeah. It's
and
it's a good thing to
you're
do.
yeah, and it gives everyone else permission too, right? We are just
Mm,
not perfection. We are learning. We are becoming.
yes.
And so yeah, I started doing that, which helps me control the noise. And anyway, so I started releasing those singles as kind
Mhm.
of that, a learning thing. And I noticed after a while that they had a pacing to them. And I thought, well, I think this is an album. I think this is an album. And
Mm,
I need a couple more tracks. So I had everything but Becoming and Emergence.
mm,
And so I worked on those two and then put it together as an album. And then I did a dear friend of mine who's a very gifted mixer and producer in New York, Carson Elliott. I brought him on board to kind of help me tweak this with it being an album. And so he did a really wonderful job of mixing and mastering.
yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and then Emergence was born. Yeah.
Spawn. That's a wonderful story. I think it's interesting now you kind of again, I feel like your albums follow sort of the stages of your life with Emergence being at a point where you are kind of learning different things, but there is a with everything that you learn, there's a learning curve. It's a work in progress consistently. So it's interesting that you started to see some of the tracks sort of start to feel like they're coming up with you and where you're at. So that's super, super interesting. Now, you mentioned, sorry, go ahead.
And it's interesting to me too, as you're talking, this is getting things going through my brain. So forgive me, but
No, it's
um,
wonderful.
the music, when you are artists like we are, the music talks to you, right?
Mm,
it pushes you in different directions too. And so I find that it's a co-creation process. I feel like any good artist is channeling as well as creating. And so yeah, it has its way with you. And I didn't know I was going to do another album until
Yeah.
probably last spring. And then the music went, okay, this is an album. So yeah, we don't
Mm.
always know.
No, no, we don't. And I think actually that really brings me on to a point that I did see again on your website, that you said you were trained classically, but felt a calling to simply let the music play through you. So I feel like sometimes the music is as much as we think we're in control of what we're doing and how things should be placed, and even strategically, like I want to market this way, I want to put this as an album, I want to put this as a single. Sometimes the music does the talking itself, and there's something so, again, I use the word magical a lot with music, because I really do feel there's some kind of something working behind with the cogs that we don't see. And that's what's happening with your music as well. It's wonderful to see. um a lot of the things that you mentioned as well with the latest album was a collaboration. You've collaborated with a lot of creatives, sort of towards the second and third album in particular. How is that working with other creatives, and how do you balance the ideas and giving them the freedom to be creative with a project that that is your own?
Well, it's interesting. For me, to me, my first real collaboration was my latest release.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it is fascinating. I went to a graduation of the class that I talked about earlier in this interview. There was a graduation of a newer class, and I was asked to play. And so I played. And again, I don't rehearse what I'm going to do. I sit at the piano and I feel the energy of the room and I just let what comes through come through.
Mm,
But an odd thing was that morning, I knew I was going to incorporate the hymn, Shall We Gather at the River? I just woke up knowing that needed to be in this
mm,
improv. And so I did it. And I came home after that weekend and I knew it wasn't done. I needed to record a track with that
mm,
too. And so that was Embodiment, the piano solo, which I released in the fall.
mhm,
And I knew as I was recording it, there was something that came through that's like, okay, Claire, you're going to leave space in this piano solo for a cello, because you're also going to do a version of cello and piano with it. So if you listen to the first embodiment, it is it is full in its piano solo thing, but there is a space kind of in the middle of the range that's
mhm.
just open, which for
Yeah.
the piano solo version, it adds a kind of eeriness, a kind of what's going on, what's possible.
Right.
But with the embodiment duet, I reached out to an artist, Jami Sieber, who's a very amazing cellist, and she does electric cello too, and she's wonderful.
Mhm,
And I remember stumbling upon her stuff and going, she's the woman I want to play the cello. And
mm,
when I first reached out to her, she was in the middle of recording her own album, Feast of Losses, I believe, which came out Halloween. And so she said, I don't have the time, you know.
right.
And when I recorded that embodiment piano solo, after I recorded it, I went, send it to Jami, send her the track. So I
Right.
sent it to her, and like the next day, she responded and said, "Yeah, okay."
Wonderful. I think it's interesting because I listen to, obviously, if people are watching back on YouTube or any other platform, please do go stream Claire's music. It's wonderful. I actually listened to the duet first and then went back to the solo piano version. And it is interesting because if I had heard the piano version, I wouldn't personally feel that there's much more that can be done to the track. But when I listened back to the chat with the one with the cello, I was like, oh no, I can see it. It was meant to be there. Like it feels like that's how it should be. So it's so interesting that actually you can have such a different experience with both tracks. If you listen to the piano first, which I would recommend anybody watching back, you won't feel like there's anything missing. For me personally, I was like, actually, this does feel, the track does what it needs to do. But when you listen to the duet, you're like, oh wow, that's just had a bit more flavor onto it, which I didn't think was needed, but it's wonderful. It's an amazing piece. Um, with obviously congratulations on the releases that you've done so far, but with your future in music, what do you hope to do? What's the plan for yourself moving forward?
That's such an interesting question. I don't know. I don't know.
That's fair.
I will say that what comes through is I would love to travel some. I'd love to perform in person. I
Mm,
am, the end of this month, I'm doing an in-person course in Chicago about stress relief with music. And so I'll have
mm,
the keyboard there, and I plan on doing some playing and a bunch of different stuff. But I'm really looking forward to interacting with an actual audience and seeing where that takes me. I'd love to do more of that.
mm,
Um, I just don't know. I love the process of recording, so I don't see that stopping. I'm hoping someday to get into a recording studio and really do some tracks with a acoustic piano again and see what kind of trouble I can get into.
Yes, no, that's wonderful. I think, like you say, it's where the music takes you rather than kind of you driving it. But I think there's going to be a wonderful new chapter in your life, I'm sure, with music. It's been part of your life for so long. I can never imagine you not doing it. So it's wonderful that you are keeping at it. And if you ever do some live shows in London, which I hope you do one day, it'd be great to see you live. I think I was listening to the pieces, and that's exactly what I thought. I was like, actually, I'd love to hear this in person because I think, I mean, there's loads of concerts that happen, but with your projects, whether it's Labyrinth, whether it's Emergence or Embodiment, it's storytelling at its finest. Like there's definitely something about each track which is giving you a story, which is giving you almost like a visual perception of where you're going in the track. So it's wonderfully written.
Oh.
And I'm so excited to see how you kind of progress with it. Um, do you ever imagine also doing videos and visual concepts alongside your music, or are you strictly focused on the recording process?
Well, it's interesting you ask that. I do have a YouTube channel,
Mm.
and I have put together YouTube videos to
Ah,
accompany my tracks.
amazing.
So, and again, it was something that never crossed my mind until I started taking this online course. And yeah, I thought, well, maybe I can do this. So I started finding videos from Pixabay, and that kind of thing. And I'd listen to my track and I'd look and see what videos spoke to me of which track. And I'd splice them together and put them together and you know, and so I've got videos of them, which
Yes,
I really love doing. It's fun.
amazing. Oh, so you created those yourself as well? Oh, amazing, amazing.
With clips of videos that are done by professionals. Like
Okay, okay.
Pixabay has got a bunch of,
Ah, yes, 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 yes. So
they've
you
got nature ones, they've got everything. So I pick out the ones that speak to me, and I put them together and edit them and that kind of thing.
Amazing, amazing. Well, I'll definitely check that out, and I'll put the links in the description if anyone is watching back. Claire, it's been so wonderful to explore your musical journey and also connecting with you. I was watching your kind of Instagram profile, and I love the messaging around what you do. And also the fact that you see music as such a healing, you have a holistic approach to music rather than it being just sound. So I love that we've been able to connect, and I'm so excited about your future and where you go with this. So thank you so much for joining. Is there any sort of messages you want to give out to anybody watching? Do you want to sort of thank anybody that you've collaborated with? Of course, Jamie that you mentioned with the latest release. Is there any
Yeah.
final messages?
Yeah, I would like to do a little ending, if I may.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to encourage everybody to create, whether it's musician, whether it's art, whether it's anything. We are alive. We have that opportunity to work with something outside of us and within us and meld it. And
Mm,
that's so important. And don't censor yourself. Let yourself play.
that's
And then
yes.
I'd like to, of course, thank Jami. Wonderful. I'd like to thank Janet Lauer. I'd like to thank Kurt Hill. I'd like to thank Todd McCarthy, who does this online course for Spotify marketing and stuff, which is wonderful. And Carson Elliott for, I mean, all the people I've worked with, I so appreciate it.
That's
Co-creating is huge, right? And thank you. This has been
thank you.
such a joy, such a
Oh,
joy.
thank
And
you.
I loved diving into your YouTube channel. There's
Thank
such
you so
a,
much.
your love just comes through the screen. It's
Oh,
amazing.
thank you so much. That means a lot. That means a lot. I feel like that's my connection with music and doing content creation is is all about, and as cliche as it sounds, is about spreading the love and feeling the love back, which I think is what we all need and want. So that means a lot. But yes, I think that's why I've sort of connected to your music as well, because I think it's full of love. It's made with love. So it's been wonderful. So thank you for your comments. Thank you for your time. And yeah, I will talk to everybody soon. Bye, everyone.